Hey everyone, how's it going? Your brain's fried from all the info you've been taking in over the last 2 days. Yeah! How many people have a coffee, energy drink? Good, good. Cool, well look, I'll try and make this as engaging as possible, since I'm sure all of you are all fatigued from everything you've taken in. So before we get into the actual presentation, I thought it's best that I give you an overview of who I am. So my name is Reilly. I host a YouTube channel called Kiwi Talkz, where I interview game developers about various games that they've worked on and their fields of expertise. So I've spoken to well over 150 plus game developers from various studios, some prestigious ones like these. And as cool as it is to do this presentation today, part of the reason I am also here is to give back to the New Zealand game community in any way I can. So if you do have any questions at the end of this, feel free to ask me. I've already had a number of people over the last day or so asking for intel on GTA 6 and Half-Life 3. I am not going to reveal that publicly, but maybe if you talk to me off to the side, I might tell you some things. So I'll just give you a quick overview of some of the people I've spoken to. So we have Mike Wicken, who's a genius man, very animated and bubbly. He was the senior designer on the Metroid Prime trilogy and Donkey Kong Country Returns, and I'll actually be referencing him in this presentation. Will Shen here, he's got a cool story. He was an intern on Fallout 3, became a designer on Skyrim, then worked his way up to being the lead quest designer on Starfield. Sean Green, one of the OGs from id Software. During the Doom days, he's worked very closely with John Romero and John Carmack, two legends in the industry. And then we have Sean Layden here. You probably remember him from many PlayStation shows and the E3 expos back in the day. He was the former chairman and CEO of PlayStation Studios and Sony Interactive Entertainment America. How many people here like Horizon Zero Dawn? You have that man to thank right there, because he greenlit it. Okay? Besides from that, I've hosted panels at PAX Australia twice, once in 2023 with legendary composer Mick Gordon, who's obviously best known for composing Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, as well as other games like Killer Instinct and Prey. And I must say, he's one of the nicest people that I've ever met, which is saying a lot given the reputation us Kiwis have for being nice, right? And Josh Wire, I spoke with last year. He was a designer on Portal and Half-Life 2 and lead designer on Portal 2. One of the greatest games of all time. Just saying. So, anyway, that's enough about me. I am here today to talk about a little company called Nintendo. Maybe you've heard of them, right? All jokes aside, Nintendo are responsible for some of the greatest innovations in the gaming industry and have some of the most legendary IP from Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Animal Crossing, Smash Brothers, the list goes on. So what I'm going to do today, or attempt to do, is I'm going to take as much info as I can from all the Nintendo interviews I've done over the years and try and funnel it into this presentation. Now, I can't talk about everything, so hopefully this just gives you a glimpse into how they work. But before we get into Nintendo specifically, I do think we need to take a step back for a moment and look at the way the Japanese design games. Because once we understand how the Japanese design games, it's a little bit easier to understand how Nintendo works. So, just to switch this up a little bit, I'm going to play you a clip from an interview I did earlier this year with Sean Layden, who I mentioned before. We talked for about an hour, and there was a specific section where he explained how Japanese design works. So I'm just going to play that to you right now. Listen in intensely, because this is a man of wisdom right here.
You know, the Japanese gaming tradition, such as it is, Nintendo notwithstanding, came out of the arcade experience. And the psychology or the design sensibility around building arcade games is really about how much fun for a 100 yen coin. I'm going to drop 100 yen in the slot. How much fun should, as a player, I expect to have, and as a developer, how much should I feel good to give? If it's not enough, they won't drop another coin. If it's too much, they won't drop another coin. And that's how they built their games, very much around the impact of that moment and how to make that moment super attractive and compelling that you want to see more of it. They took that, I think, into PlayStation games with that same kind of sensibility, very artisanal or very craft-like in how they would build every moment to be itself a little jewel, but again, to propel you further into the game.
Cool. All right, that gives us a general overview of how Japanese design works. Now, let's specifically get to Nintendo. Now, one of the things you have to understand is Nintendo doesn't really operate the way most game companies do. So if we were to take Sony, for example, you'd have Naughty Dog over here doing their own thing, Insomniac Games over here doing their own thing, Sucker Punch over here doing their own thing. Nintendo doesn't really operate that way. So just to give you an example, which this slide indicates, their Tokyo and Kyoto teams specifically, they have kind of like an overlapping structure. You can sometimes have a producer who's working on 6 projects at once, and what might happen is if a game studio is falling a little bit behind, they might take people from one team to assist on another, or if it increases in scope, then they might do the same thing. There's a number of reasons as to why this is, but for those that don't know, Nintendo actually has a 98% retention rate. That means that people do not leave for the most part when they work here. And given the state of the industry right now, it's good to hear, right? It gives us hope. So there are a few reasons for this. Obviously, employment laws, Japanese culture, for one. But there are 2 other reasons that don't really get spoken about. And that is to ensure that their devs are challenged and fulfilled. There's nothing worse for a creative person, and I'm a creative person, you are all creative people, to make them do the same thing over and over and over for years on end, right? So let's take, for example, Halo Studios, right, which used to be 343. Microsoft comes along and they're like, we want you to work on Halo for 4 or 5 years. Cool. They finish the game, it does well, they're like, okay, we want you to do a sequel. So then they work on Halo again for another 5 years. And then after that, they're like, oh, do another sequel. And then they work on Halo again for another 5 years. So eventually you get to a point where you become creatively stagnant. And part of the reason why Nintendo has this structure is to prevent that, right? To ensure that they're working on different projects to make sure that they're creatively stimulated and fulfilled. So, Nintendo are craftsmen, and their motto for development is to surprise and delight the player, and that actually feeds into every aspect of what they do. Now, they're a company that is known for quality. That's why they can charge like $124 for a Mario Kart world, and why seeing a discount on a Nintendo game is like seeing an albino gorilla. It's like so rare, it almost never happens. They can get away with it because of their quality, and they will sacrifice short-term gains in order to preserve the longevity of their IP. If you look at any Mario game, like the 3D Marios, the 3D Zeldas, always 90 plus on Metacritic. They always try to ensure quality no matter what. And another good example is Metroid Prime 4, which comes out in December. It was announced in 2017. Then they scrapped it and started from scratch in 2019, and they've been working on it for 8 years, and it's going to be one of the most expensive projects that they've ever worked on. And it's probably not going to sell anywhere close to the amount a Mario game or Zelda game would. So they are all about quality. And they are also all about polish, right? How often do you ever play a Nintendo game and there's a memory leak, or the game breaks, or there's weird bugs and glitches? It's pretty much something that never happens. And with The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, they actually QA'd that game for an entire year to make sure that it was as perfect as it could be before release. I mean, I played that game for like 70 hours. I didn't encounter one bug or glitch at all, which is crazy to think in this day and age with the amount of breaks and optimization problems that games have. And they're a company that care about every aspect of the game. They're very meticulous, from the sound design to the music, to the level design, programming, art, animation. They micromanage the hell out of this stuff. And if you ask any third-party developer, you can even read interviews, they'll tell you that Nintendo always makes them elevate their game, because they're looking over your shoulder and they care about the smallest minute details. And iteration, which actually plays into their retention rate, because they're able to pass on knowledge down to the younger devs, right? So the older devs can tell them about difficulties that they had or things that they struggled with and how they overcame certain problems. And a lot of that knowledge gets lost when you do vast amounts of layoffs. Cool, game mechanics. So if you were to make a prioritization list from top to bottom, game mechanics would be right at the top for Nintendo. They don't care about world, they don't care about story, they don't care about lore. They're thinking about the fundamental game mechanics before anything else. And what they'll usually do is they'll come up with a core mechanic, and then they'll have a whole bunch of branching mechanics and then go from there. So I've got Donkey Kong Bonanza as my example here. How many people have actually played it? Not many, okay. It's understandable, the Nintendo Switch 2 is very expensive, and everything in New Zealand is expensive anyway, so I'll give you just a rough overview of how Donkey Kong Bonanza works without getting into spoilers. So the main mechanic is destructible terrain. So basically you can break anything in the world for the most part, right? And then they have a whole bunch of branching mechanics. So in this case you've got animal transformations, so you can turn into a zebra and run, you can turn into an ostrich and fly, and then you've got something similar to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild where you can climb any surface. So what Nintendo usually does is they have the core mechanic, they have a whole bunch of branching mechanics, and then towards the end of a game, and Donkey Kong Bonanza is like the epitome of this, it's almost like the game goes into a bit of a crescendo and it keeps building and building, and they cohesively bring every mechanic together flawlessly at the end. And that just ties back to their whole game design philosophy. And another thing to consider is they think of the mechanic first and then look at the IP that best fits that mechanic. So there's actually a video you can find online of them experimenting with the destructible terrain mechanic with a Goomba from Mario. And then obviously once they got it down and they thought that it was fun, then they thought, you know what, this best fits with Donkey Kong. And that often happens with all of their games. Ease of control. This is the other thing that they focus a lot of time on. They absolutely nail their control scheme early on. A lot of devs I've spoken to in the past, they might get their control scheme down roughly, they get it roughly okay, and then they put it on the back burner and might fine tune it later. Nintendo nails this first, right? And they always try to ensure that their control scheme is intuitive. They basically want you to feel like it's second nature and that you're not even holding a controller in your hand. They try to make them as responsive as possible, whether it's a Super Mario Odyssey or a Breath of the Wild or a Metroid Dread. And they try to make sure that it's accessible. Wii Sports is like the perfect example, obviously, because a 5-year-old can play it, an 80-year-old can play it. But even in other cases, they try to make it at least accessible, but then hard to master. So those are the two key things that they focus on early on in the development process. And just to quote Shigeru Miyamoto, a good control scheme is one where the player never thinks about which button to press. They just do it naturally. Wise words. Prototyping over design documents. If you are ever in the privileged position to pitch an idea to Nintendo, or you're in a room with Nintendo, or they might possibly fund one of your projects, I can tell you right now, do not waste your time with storyboards or images or any type of design document, because you're on the road to nowhere. And to further emphasize this point, I'm going to play you a clip now from the producer of Metroid Prime 2 and 3, Brian Walker. He was also Senior Director of Development on Donkey Kong Country Returns. Listen to what he says about Nintendo's approach to prototyping.
And Nintendo is all about making a prototype. You can throw fancy illustrations and storyboards at them all day. They're not impressed until they can play it. And we were able to get playable prototypes. Basically, DK jumping around gray boxes scattered all over the place. We were able to get these prototypes in front of them very quickly and then just soak up that feedback. And this feedback was down to the pixel level. Try this, change the ground pounding cadence, one more pixel here, give him the ability to perch and lean over, these blocks. And it was just this steady stream of really valuable guidance that these early prototypes were able to bring forth that made the project as a whole much more straightforward than if we had been with any other publisher, I'm convinced. One of the larger publishers I worked with previously used to joke, if your design document, your initial design document wasn't the thickness of a phone book, keep trying.
What?
Yes, and they would literally joke as we sat down for the design document review process. This feels about right. As they're literally, holding 300 or 400 pages in their hands. Yeah, this feels about right. That represented the amount of diligence that a team was supposed to have put into the process before even they got into a prototype. That's the difference between the Nintendo process and a lot of other developers, I'm sorry to say.
Love Brian. He's a great, great guy. So next one, we have innovation through constraints. Now, I've seen this online for a number of years, videos. There's probably people in this room that think that like Nintendo is behind the times. You need to have better hardware. You need to be on the level of Sony and Microsoft. But their design philosophy actually interweaves with their hardware because they believe that limitations breeds creativity. And there's no better example than the Italian plumber himself, right? So early on, they needed to find a way to make him very distinctive and to stand out, and they were limited with the hardware at the time. And so they came up with the idea of giving him a hat and a mustache, and the most iconic video game character of all time was born. Something similar with Metroid. They couldn't find a way to animate Samus to make her crawl through small spaces, so they came up with the idea of a ball, and it ended up becoming the most iconic item upgrade in the entire series. And this has followed them for decades upon decades now. So something to consider whenever you're facing a problem with a hardware constraint, or maybe even money and resource. The problem you have might actually be your solution. Okay, make it hard, not stressful. This one's a cool one. How many people here have played a Metroid game before? Nice, a number of you. Just as a side note, Metroid is not only my favorite Nintendo franchise, but my favorite franchise overall. So the people that haven't played it, there's a part of my soul that's dying right now. So please get around to playing it at some point. So for those that haven't played it, I'm just going to give you an example here. So we've got two examples from the same franchise. Metroid Dread, which is in the left corner, which is a hard game, and Metroid Prime 2, which is considered a stressful game. So with Metroid Dread, there are sections in the game where you encounter these robots, which are called Emmy, and they basically are the equivalent of Mr. X. They chase you around the map. If they get you, it's pretty much an instant game over. There are small button inputs that are down to the frame that you might be able to input to evade capture, but these sections are considered hard, but they're manageable, and that's because you've only got one thing to think about, and that's evading these robots. By contrast, we have Metroid Prime 2, which is considered the most difficult entry in the entire franchise, and it's considered a stressful game. Now, Metroid Prime 2 incorporates a light world and a dark world, and this isn't new. A lot of games have done this. The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past has done this. The difference is the dark world in this game has a toxic atmosphere. So that means whenever you're in the world, you actually just take damage by being in it, unless you're in a specific light bubble. Now, there is a point in the game where you encounter this boss, the infamous Boost Ball Guardian. And I remember playing against this boss back in the day and getting really, really angry. And what you need to know is at this point in the game, this boss takes place in the dark world, but there are no light bubbles. So that means that throughout the entire fight, even if it doesn't hit you, you're already taking damage. On top of that, you only have a certain amount of health at this point in the game. So if you get hit, which is bound to happen, it takes off a lot of health. On top of this, you have an ammo system. This is the only Metroid game that has an ammo system. So when you break this down, you are thinking about the hostile atmosphere that's taking your health. You've got this Boost Ball Guardian that's hitting you, and it actually has parts where it's invulnerable, so you can't damage it. And on top of that, you're trying to find health and you're trying to find ammo. So what this does is it actually creates a cognitive overload in the player, and this can stress players out. And Nintendo advised Retro Studios, who actually made this game, to avoid stress wherever possible. Now, something to know about Nintendo is they're perfectly willing to let you do your own thing. They just want you to defend your idea. So they did proceed, Retro did proceed with doing this despite the warnings from Nintendo. But it is something to consider when you're thinking about the difficulty in a game. Is it going to be hard for the player or is it going to be stressful? Okay. Pillars of design. So the way Nintendo tries to streamline its process, its design process, and to make sure that things stay on track is they break things down into pillars. So we have the Metroid Prime franchise here as an example. So one of the key pillars is exploration. Despite it being a first-person game and shooting being a core element, it is not one of the pillars of the game. It's merely there to support it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play you a clip from Mike Wicken, who I mentioned earlier. He further explains about the pillars of design.
I build along fundamental pillars, right? I'll pick three pillars. This is what the game's about. Everything that we do for that game has to support as many of those pillars as possible, right? One of the pillars for Metroid Prime series was exploration, right? None of the pillars was shooting, right? So shooting was just something you did while you explored. right? Shooting supported exploration, but it wasn't a pillar, right? Moving, jumping vertically and horizontally supported exploration. Moving wasn't a pillar. Exploration was a pillar, right? So if you concentrate your game design with a few clear things that you're going to build your entire game around, it simplifies all of your planning and your production pathways so that there's not a whole lot of feature creep that goes into it. Oh, I saw this cool movie where, you know, bullet time or whatever. We should add that to the game because it's cool. No, we don't do that. That way lies madness. We should not do that. Save it for the next game, right?
Bubbly man is Mike Wicken. And a final quote from Shigeru Miyamoto: "A good idea is something that does not solve just one single problem, but rather can solve multiple problems at once." So, quick recap. Craftsman approach to development. Think about quality. Think about polish. Think about care and iteration, if you want to be more like Nintendo. Focus on the core game mechanics before anything else. Don't think about world building. Don't think about story. Just make sure that the game's fun first. Make the game easy to control. Have a control scheme that's intuitive, it's responsive, and as accessible as possible. Prototyping over design documents. As I mentioned, if you ever want to talk to Nintendo, present them a prototype. Do not waste your time with design documents and storyboards. Innovation through constraints. Look at the hardware, and what you think may be a problem might actually be your solution. You can make it hard but not stressful. How much of a cognitive overload is it going to be on the player? And focus on the core design pillars. What is the fundamental thing that your game is about? And use that to dictate the path that you're on. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. There's a few people I just want to quickly thank. All the Retro Studios guys that I know behind the scenes: Jack Matthews, Zoid Kirsch, Kynan Pearson, Mike Wicken, Brian Walker, Carlos Mendieta. I think that's all of them. If I've forgotten anyone, I'm sorry. And there's a few people in Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Japan I want to thank. I can't say their names out loud because I've got to protect their identities, but you know who you are. And I just want to thank the sound guy and the video guy, because in a past life I've done what you did, and nobody pays attention to you guys unless you do something wrong. So I thought I'd just give you some props. But yeah, so I'll be around here if you want to ask me any questions, not just about Nintendo or about any other studios. Feel free to ask me anything, just not about GTA 6, please. Yeah, I might see you at the after party later. But otherwise, have a good afternoon.